Hi, we're FocusFlow. My name is Parshana.
I'm Mio.
So about FocusFlow. We have three main goals about FocusFlow. We want to introduce Pomodoro integration, we want to leverage the Apple ecosystem, and streamline workflow. We'll introduce Pomodoro integration by adding it to the Apple clock for task organization. The Pomodoro technique is essentially two timers that alternate in a way where as soon as one goes off, the next starts, and the process alternates over and over. For leveraging the Apple ecosystem, we want to utilize Apple's widespread adoption for accessible productivity enhancement. And thirdly, we want to streamline workflow, enabling efficient organization of work, rest periods, and amplifying user focus and efficiency. So some target users and key features that we had. For needs, we noticed that we needed something people needed something that was easily accessible for a Pomodoro clock, such that it would simplify the user's experience by minimizing the need for downloading any apps or navigating complex websites. Some pain points that we were trying to address was the struggle of creating multiple timers on the existing Apple clock, but we noticed that it took multiple steps to add timers and it was hard to do so since the interface was built for just doing one timer at a time. And lastly, some expectations that we saw was a desire to see alternating timers with alarms to follow the application of the Pomodoro technique. So our problem statement revolves around many individuals struggling with time management and productivity in their daily lives. Existing productivity tools, while effective, can lack integration and users existing routines. Users face challenges in seamlessly transitioning between different tasks and maintaining their focus. And they wanted something that was versatile with integrated solutions that were familiar to the users themselves. So the reason that this is important and relevant, and as a college student as well, I think effective time management is very crucial for women's success. Poor productivity can lead to increased stress, missed deadlines, and decreased overall performance. By integrating into the Apple devices, we can improve accessibility and adoption among users. And lastly, to address challenges, improves overall productivity and well-being.
So for our user research method, our first form of surveying was the Google form survey we used for the pre-screeners to get a guise of talking to a large demographic of college students. After the pre-screener, we determined candidates. For the post-screener interview, we gathered intel and made journey maps to get an idea of the general demographic that would use this app and thoughts they had about the current forms of applications. And our second form of surveying we used was in-person interviews and Zoom. We chose to do this to allow for the easiest form of communication and comfortability for our testing users. And lastly, we performed usability testing to learn more about how the users interacted with our initial designs. So some key observations that we had from our initial screener, we saw that a majority of the demographic, almost 90% of students that had or used, were students that had or used Apple devices. And of those 90% of students, 70% of those use the Apple clock on a daily basis. And this allowed us to center our design to be incorporated in an interface that most people were already familiar with through Apple.
So some key observations we had were that most students were familiar with the Pomodoro clock and the Pomodoro methods, as most people were above the 3 average line upward. When delving more into why certain students were more familiar or unfamiliar with Pomodoro and what their struggles or solutions were, can be viewed on the next slide. So some problems that we observed were from the current models of Pomodoro that existed. A lot of people had similar ideas of confusing UI, inconsistent notifications, having to go into the app to turn on and off the timer, as well as having to use websites when they wanted to use apps. And from information like this, we were able to gather intel of commonalities and start putting together our journey map and information architecture map to get a general flow of what users needed.
So the journey map and the 5 steps of in the journey map is listed here. So the first is awareness, where the user starts out with not knowing which app to use for the Pomodoro technique. And the second is research and selecting the application, where she researches and reads reviews for different apps, but gets overwhelmed by the options and fears that she'll choose the wrong app. And then she downloads it, and the installation can be slow, making her feel more frustrated. And after installation comes the setup and exploring the app itself. So after opening the app, she gets confused with the app navigation as there's no tutorials, and she has to take a good amount of time to get familiar with it. And so finally, once she figures it out, she's able to have like a good study session to use this Pomodoro app. However, the notification she gets from other applications distracts her. So our idea is to resolve these issues mapped in the journey map so that other users don't feel the same way. So some user stories that we have is, as for the first one, as a student, I want to be able to set a work time and a break time. The second, as a runner, I want to set a running time and a walk time that continuously loops. For the third one, as a person cautious of screen time, I want to set a looping interval of screen time and break time.
So going into our first user story is Sarah. Sarah is a very diligent high school student, and she juggles a lot of extracurriculars and coursework. So she really requires having an efficient time management strategy to stay on top of all of her responsibilities. Some pain points that she currently had with the Pomodoro technique and the current existing platforms was the lack of customization. She was unable to adjust time for works and breaks that fit her own study regimen. Second was inflexible scheduling. The app's rigid scheduling options made it really challenging for her to tailor the Pomodoro technique to work with her fluctuating study demands. And lastly, it was difficult in task-specific adjustments. Sarah noticed that when she wanted to do things from coursework time management to extracurricular time management, it was hard to adjust through the existing Pomodoro apps. Our second user is Alex. He is a sophomore studying engineering. He too, like our previous person, had a lot of struggle with managing their time for school. So some of their pain points that they had when trying to use the Pomodoro technique included limited platform support. They liked to use their smartphone and tablet for studying, but they noticed how inconvenient it was to have the website or app running on only one of the 2 devices and having to struggle with choosing. And secondly was difficulty managing distractions. He struggles with managing distractions because of notifications and social media and other interruptions, and most Pomodoro techniques and apps in the market right now require you to go within the app, which can be very distracting.
So for this third person, we have Sammy. She is a junior student that loves working out at the gym. She likes to use the Apple timers to set times for exercising and for breaks, but she wants to better manage the difference between exercising and breaks without the need to open her phone. So some pain points that she experiences is no alternating times. So Sammy's workout demands a balance between intense exercise and rest intervals, but she finds herself inconvenienced of manually toggling between her smartphone timer to switch from exercise to breaks. And so this disrupts the flow of her routine, distracting her from her focus and impeding her progress. So she wants a seamless solution that effortlessly transitions between exercise and rest phases. And the second is the do not disturb mode. So Sammy focuses herself in the intensity of her workouts, and she wants a distraction-free environment to maximize her concentration and performance. But the intrusive buzz of notifications pierces through her concentration, courtesy of her smartphone's default do not disturb mode. So here we have it mapped the problems to the solutions. So the first problem was current Pomodoro sites are distractive to enable and incompatible with certain devices. So our solution was to enable the do not disturb feature built into the iPhone to stop distractions from occurring. Our second was that there were restricted features based on the apps or websites chosen. So we fixed this by adding a wide amount of customizable features like customizable names, sounds, and intervals. Lastly, a problem was that we have to use a website and it was hard to learn a new UI. So we wanted to incorporate the already familiar interface of the Apple clock, which is already downloaded on each iPhone.
So here was our initial lo-fi design to attribute to the user needs that we identified. And we tried to start with a very simple interface as it mirrors what the interface of the current Apple clock uses, but to include the features that we wanted to implement. So our initial hi-fi design based from our lo-fi design for within the app follows the same color themes as well as scheduling options, sounds, and overall layout and structure of the current Apple Tech flow and clock to ensure a flow for the users to be familiar with. And here's also a guise of how the Apple home screen would look like, where the break time would appear in one color, the work time would appear in another color, and timers would go off, very similar to the current interface of the Apple clock.
So for user testing, we conducted testing with 5 participants. The first step we took was to explain our objective as well as what Pomodoro exactly aims to do. The second step was to gather demographic information, which included their age, whether or not they use an iPhone or iOS device, what type of device they primarily use for studying, and also how often they use the Pomodoro technique. The third was the scenarios and tasks that they did, which we will explain later on. And lastly, we asked questions regarding their experience and interaction with the application, such as them rating their experience, asking if it was intuitive or not, whether or not they would use this feature in the clock app, and if the designs were aesthetically pleasing. So we created 4 scenarios, each with around 4 to 5 tasks, and we recorded observations and the user's responses to the questions we posed during the testing. So the scenarios that we have were starting the timer, editing the work time settings, pausing the timer as well as stopping the entire clock, and finally changing the work time and short time or short break labels. And here are some example task performances. So an example task was changing the label from work time to exercise. Most were able to identify how to change it, but didn't notice that their change was registered or pause to make sure that it was registered. And so this told us that we need to find a way to change either the font or color to indicate that a change occurred.
So after we completed our usability testing, we went along and started performing an interactive design. So some common likes that we saw was that it was very intuitive, as it seemed to resemble a lot of the same features as the current Apple clock does, as well as the ability to change labels was very enjoyable. Some common dislikes that we noticed was the changes that they made weren't really noticeable, and it was hard for them to be sure they changed something before saving it. And also, they wanted a feature to add more than just 2 timers in case they wanted to add more like 3 or 4 timers that went through continuously. So based off the feedback that we got, we started making changes. Some changes we made was changing the font color to a more noticeable orange color so that you knew you changed it and what you changed it to. Further, we added a feature to add more time blocks so they could add as many as they feel like that would as well loop over. And lastly, to add a label to change the name of the timers. The initial design was very limited to what you could change it to, so we made it more versatile to accommodate people outside of just working, but also for exercising. And so now our Figma demo. So in our Figma, we had 4 specific use cases or scenarios. Our first was to change the work time and the break time timers themselves. So in the event that I want to change the timer from 22 minutes to 35 minutes, I can go ahead and press the work time. And I'll see it's at 22 minutes and I can change it to 35. Once I've seen that I like the time, I can go ahead and save it. And I'll see that the time is updated here. Similarly, I wanted to change the break time to 5 minutes. I see it's at 8 minutes. I adjust it to 5 minutes and I save it. And I can see the final change appearing here. In our second flow, we wanted to resemble other adjusted settings that you can perform. So if I wanted to change the work time sound from radar to canopy, because I prefer that sound, I can go ahead and open it and change the sounds to canopy. Once I've seen that it's selected and I like my selection, I can go ahead and go back and I'll see that it's in orange so that I know that a change has been made. Further, I wanted to turn on the auto start option so I can just click this dial, and since it's green, similar to the Apple interface, I know now that it's on. And lastly, I wanted to change the total intervals to 5. And by pressing the number, I see the color change, so I can see now all the different changes that I've made, and I want to go ahead and save it. Cool. And in our third flow, we wanted to show what it would look like once a timer has gone off. So as again, that's similar to the Apple interface, the timer has gone off and I want to start the break time. So I simply press next timer, and now as shown, our break time has started. In the event that I need to go off somewhere now and I need to pause the timer, I can go ahead and press the pause button and my timer has stopped. Lastly, if I wanted to change it by turning it off, I can go ahead and press the X button. And lastly, if I wanted to transition from my work times to now exercising and I want to change the names, I can go ahead and go into work time, see that the current label is labeled as work time, change that to exercise, and as before, our color changes to orange, so it is noticeable that a change has occurred, and we can save it. And we see the change appear up here. And say I also want to change my break time from short break to rest. I see as well that the change appears, and I can go ahead and save it.
So some of the key takeaways that we had are here. So we decided to set a clear objective, effective communication, risk management, continuous learning and improvement, and we adhered to the deadlines and the milestones. And some challenges that we faced were that because it was only us two, it was hard to see what to prioritize and focus. So we scheduled time with each other using when to meet to accommodate our schedules. And also we created key roles for each member to split our work. So Parshana was working on the user interface and I was more focused on the user experience.
So lastly, thank you for listening to our presentation. We have also included a survey form, so please fill it out with any thoughts, questions, or concerns, or improvements that you'd like to share to help us improve our design. Thank you.